The next thing I wanted to talk about was this article. I believe this is from the Crypto-currencies website. What they're talking about is a new area where cryptocurrencies are interfacing with society. And it has to do with hiding finances and to do with so-called money laundering. So I just took a tiny snippet of this article that I think is really relevant to talk about. This reads, the Financial Times reports that Aisha Vardag, a London divorce lawyer, is voicing her concerns on this very topic of hiding money. So digital currency can be used to run a parallel economy. People will go to immense lengths as a spousal claim is more damaging than tax because it is half of your wealth. So lawyers are beginning to take note, and you would think that they would be perhaps ahead of the curve, but a number of forums indicate that the opposite is true. Usually when people talk about hiding assets, it's to do with purchasing illegal things on places like the Silk Road. But now lawyers are starting to look at how this may affect so-called family law or divorce courts. And so this guy said, husbands are becoming more and more creative in terms of what they can do to reduce their wealth, and the courts are struggling to catch up. It's just like when the internet started, it was difficult for courts to catch up. So basically what they're talking about here is people, and I would assume primarily men, are trying to use cryptocurrencies to hide their assets from divorce courts. Now, the whole divorce court system in the United States, and I assume this is true of many other places in the world, I think this is also true of the UK to some extent. It's not true of every place in the world, but many places. They are horribly, horribly corrupt. The whole divorce thing has been catastrophic to families over the last several decades. In general, there has been this movement of the state trying to convince women to become single mothers and to leech off of the state for their funds to provide for their families, which is really, really unhealthy for the families and for the children in particular. And the other thing that they've encouraged is that some pretty corrupt and unfair standards in terms of how men are treated in the event of divorce when you don't have a prenuptial agreement or whatever. And it's gotten to some pretty ridiculous levels, to the point of where men have basically been raped for their sperm and still owe 50% of their income to the people that raped them for child support for children that they never desired to have, and did everything that they could to avoid having those children in the first place. Pretty scary stuff. And the statistics is as well for, in terms of women lying to their partners about who the father of their children is. It's shockingly high. So the whole divorce situation and childcare situation is really quite corrupt. Now, there was this expose that was made sometime in the last year or two entitled Divorce Corp. And so there was this, the filmmaker who created this, he was looking at how in the United States, courts and divorce lawyers make a monumental amount of money off of convincing people to go to court with each other over divorces rather than working it out privately outside of the court system. Basically, all of the money goes to the court system, and a very healthy portion of it also tends to go to the women over the men. But the whole system is quite corrupt. So the idea that it's dismaying to see lawyers complaining about people trying to hide money from courts, because the courts are essentially highway bandits in this kind of scenario. And so they're basically saying, oh, well, we've been making so much money off of divorce court, and now people are starting to hide money, and so we're going to make less money off of it, which is a pretty pathetic and predatory thing for them to communicate. And of course, they frame it in terms of like, ooh, money laundering, and oh, this is men taking money away from their ex-wives who deserve their alimony. Which is a completely unfair representation of the situation. I'm sure that may be the case in some situations, but it's a individual to individual basis that you would make that judgment, and not something that you could judge en masse. But the only thing we can say on a very widespread scale is that the lawyers and the court systems are making hand over fist off of the popularity of divorce. And the rate of divorce in the United States is pretty scary. Let me see if I can pull this up real quick. So according to divorcecorp.com, which was this expose that I was talking about, 41% of marriages, the first marriages, end in divorce, 60% of second marriages, and 73% of third marriages. So that is a lot of money being funneled into the divorce court system. So I actually think that this is an area where people may be able to actually achieve much more liberty and get their funds out of the hands of leeches and predators and some pretty nasty people. I think that cryptocurrencies can be quite helpful for that, provided that they have the right mechanisms for private transaction. So this last story that I wanted to talk about today is about the Silk Road. There was a paper that was recently written as of May 13th, and it's an academic paper, and the title of the paper was "Not an eBay for Drugs, the Crypto Market Silk Road as a Paradigm-Shifting Criminal Innovation." So this is written by Judith Aldridge from University of Manchester School of Law and David Descaries-Hetu from the University of Montreal School of Criminology. And we'll just go over the abstract, and then I'm going to go over one news article about this paper. So the abstract reads, "The online crypto market Silk Road has been often characterized as an eBay for drugs, with drug consumers making personal use-size purchases." In other words, people buying drugs for using them themselves. Our research demonstrates that this is not the case. Using a web crawler, we downloaded all drug listings from Silk Road on September 2013. We found that a substantial portion of the transactions are best characterized as business to business, with sales in quantities and prices typical of purchases made by drug dealers sourcing stock from the distributors. High price quantity sales generated between 31 and 45% of the revenue, a pretty substantial amount, making sales to drug dealers the key Silk Road drug business. As such, the Silk Road was what we refer to as a transformative, as opposed to incremental, criminal innovation. Criminal being in terms of the law and not morally, of course, with the key Silk Road customers actually with the key Silk Road customers being actually drug dealers sourcing stock for local street operations, we were witnessing a new breed of retail drug dealer, equipping with a technological subcultural capital skill set for sourcing stock. Well, that is a mouthful. Sales on Silk Road increased from an estimated 14.4 million in mid-2012 to 89.7 million by our calculations, more than a 600% increase in just over a year, demonstrating the demand for this kind of illicit online marketplace. With Silk Road functioning to considerable degrees at the wholesale broker market level, its virtual location should reduce violence, intimidation, and territorialism. Results are discussed in terms of the opportunities crypto markets provide for criminologists who have thus far been reluctant to step outside of social surveys and administrative data in order to access the world of webometric and big data. So I wanted to look at an article kind of summarizing the findings of this paper. This is written by Andy Greenberg at Wired Magazine. And I have to say, Andy Greenberg really is the preeminent crypto journalist right now. Andy wrote, "The dark web may have a silver lining, according to a pair of academics. A new class of geekier, less violent drug dealers. According to University of Lausanne criminologist David Decary-Hetou and University of Manchester law professor Judith Albridge, that layer of anonymity that is provided by Tor and so forth, made technical know-how and online customer service not a propensity for violence, the barrier to entry for dealers on the Silk Road. Quote, this new breed of drug dealer is likely to be relatively free from the violence typically associated with traditional drug markets," reads the paper. The title of which is called Silk Road, A Paradigm-Shifting Criminal Innovation, which I quite agree with. Whereas violence in the traditional drug trade was commonly used to gain market share, protect turfs, and resolve conflicts, the virtual location and anonymity that the crypto market provides reduces or eliminates the need or even the ability to resort to violence. In the drugs crypto market era, the paper adds, having good customer service and writing skills may be more important than muscles and face-to-face connections, which of course I think is a very positive development. All of that assumes, without much hard evidence, that transactions between drug dealers and their suppliers lead to dangerous conflicts more often than transactions between dealers and their customers. And I would love to see some more stats on this. Is there more violence between the dealers and the suppliers, or between the dealers and the customers? But Aldridge argues that you don't have to swallow that premise in order to take her larger point about how the Silk Road model reduces violence. Virtual drug deals don't allow for physical attacks. Quote, people who don't meet face-to-face can't hit each other or shoot each other, she says. Which I think is quite an obvious and good point. According to the study's measurements, the top 20% of Silk Road deals were for more than 1,000 to 1,475 for cannabis and 3,494 for ecstasy, for instance. Those amounts, which Decary-Hetou and Aldridge compared with previous studies on real-world drug dealers, sound like far larger purchases than those intended for personal consumption. And in terms of revenue, those high-priced deals were much more important to the site sellers' livelihoods, bringing in between 31% and 45% of their total revenue versus just 3 or 4% for deals in the cheapest 20%. The presence of products like precursor ingredients for synthesizing drugs and lab notes also implies that drug dealers, not just consumers, were shopping on the site. And actually that would seem to imply also that people are not only using it to buy from suppliers, but also manufacturing their own drugs. And I would imagine that, from what I understand, if you have a space and you're willing to take the risk, it's not exactly rocket science to grow some cannabis and sell it on the Silk Road. I imagine that some other drugs are more difficult to kind of cook up yourself. The study also notes that the Silk Road trade focused far more on less addictive and harmful drugs than might have previously been assumed. Quote, drugs typically associated with drug dependence, harmful use, and chaotic lifestyles, such as heroin, methamphetamine, and crack cocaine, do not much appear on Silk Road, and they generate very little revenue, the study reads. It explains that skew by pointing to the waiting period between a Silk Road drug buy and the product's arrival vacuum sealed in the mail. The site therefore may be better suited for purchases by recreational drug users than the resources and time to place orders and wait for deliveries. So people with that are dependent on drugs and have chaotic lifestyles, they probably don't have the time to wait around for that. That makes a good deal of sense. If you are addicted to drugs, and you there tends to be a short period of time when you buy them and when you consume them, then you probably wouldn't use the Silk Road because you don't have to wait for it to be mail delivered if you buy it on the corner. If the Silk Road did in fact reduce violence, that's in part by design. The site's founder, who called himself the Dread Pirate Roberts, wrote that his creation was intended to enable non-violent small-time dealers and to take power away from bloody cartels. Here's a quote from the Dread Pirate Roberts. For the first time, I saw the drug cartels and the dealers and every person in the whole damn supply chain in a different light. Some, especially the cartels, are basically a de facto violent, power-hungry state. Actually, I would say that they have very close relationships with power-hungry states, and so are part of the shadow cast by the state, and surely would love nothing more than to control a national government. But your average Joe pot dealer who wouldn't hurt a fly, that guy became my hero. It wasn't long, maybe a year or two after this realization, that the pieces started coming together for the Silk Road. So his vision is to take some of these drug cartels out of the business and empower some of the smaller time users to grow their business, which I think is a very interesting vision for the drug trade. Last little bit for this article from Andy Greenberg. The notion of the Silk Road as a peace-loving innovation, of course, is tarnished by prosecutors' accusations that Ulbricht paid would-be assassins to kill 6 people, including a blackmailer and an employee he thought that might act as an informant. But Aldridge counters that those murder-for-hire attempts took place outside the Silk Road's market and have little to do with its interactions. Quote, "Our argument about situational violence doesn't mean people can't be violent in other aspects of their lives. They can engage in domestic violence or fight when they're drunk, but none of those are facilitated by a crypto market." She also notes that despite the prosecution's claims, the killings that Ulbricht allegedly commissioned do not appear to have occurred, and they may have well been just law enforcement stings or scams by con artists posing as assassins. The same anonymous Bitcoin-based transactions that worked so well for facilitating drug deals, Aldrich argues, have not turned out to be a convenient system for paid murder. She writes, "We haven't seen any, to our knowledge, murder for hires happening on crypto markets. In fact, it may be much harder by virtue of the market's anonymity." Even if they do reward non-violence, Aldrich and Dekari admit that Silk Road and the sites it's inspired still account for just a tiny portion of the overall drug trade. Zeta drug cartel enforcers won't need to trade in their AK-47s and briefcases of cash for Tor and Bitcoin just yet. So I thought that was quite an interesting little study and article about the Silk Road and some of the implications. A little bit surprised to hear that a lot of the transactions appear to have been more B2B. I guess you could see maybe an enterprising college student or someone like that buying a bunch of drugs and then maybe selling them on campus, where presumably this would be much less violent places to exchange some cannabis or whatever. And so that makes some sense. Very much the focus in the past has very much been on kind of the dealer to user aspect of the Silk Road, and so it's interesting to see that there's this other channel of economic activity taking place on the Silk Road. I think that's quite interesting. And of course, I'm very sympathetic to the argument from these authors, and kind of impressed with the authors. I wouldn't think of criminologists and law professors as being like hugely open-minded on these topics, but I'm kind of impressed by their take on looking at the accusations of the killings, the murder for hire charges that have come up, that may just be fictional people trying to blackmail the operators of the website, and then the operators of the website hiring fictional killers to kill these fictional people, who may in fact just be the same people. You know, it could have been just one big elaborate FBI sting, or it could have just been a made-up story or whatever. And so I think that is relevant, especially in considering the efficacy of murder for hire over the Silk Road. It doesn't seem to have worked out very, very well at all for DPR. So with that, let us take some of your questions and take a swing at answering them. First question: do you think that anonymity should be optional in a coin? In other words, should a user be able to decide whether a transaction is anonymous or public? Well, I think that if you do make it optional, that certainly extends the utility of the cryptocurrency, because there are some people, some organizations that want to be able to do cryptocurrency transactions, and they want to be able to do it in a more open way as opposed to in a more private way. And because of this blockchain technology, it actually establishing a chain of control over money is quite effective if everyone has a public version of the ledger, and some charity or corporation or whoever can kind of publish all of their transactions. I think that's quite helpful. And obviously the chain of custody for that evidence is pretty solid as well. You know, it's just about as ironclad as it can possibly get if you have the largest supercomputer in the world working to confirm these transactions and verify them. So if you have it optional, then I think that extends the number of people or organizations that are going to be interested in using that particular currency. I do think the important thing is that the privacy should be on by default. The anonymity should be enabled by default, and it should be something that you opt out of, because at this point it's quite clear from human behavior that people will they will do whatever is default most of the time. And I think that financial privacy is very, very important. And so I think that we should make sure that is the default option for people. As for whether, a particular currency ought to have an option for non-private transactions, I don't think there's any kind of moral case to be made for that. It's just kind of what they want to do with that particular currency. And there usually is incentive for currency developers to extend the utility of the currency as much as possible. So someone asked whether we can peg cryptocurrency to fiat currencies like the dollar. So another viewer said MCX bucks on MCX Now are all tied to USD. So I think for me it's hard to I have a hard time understanding exactly how you would peg to a fiat currency and maintain that peg very consistently without having a kind of centralized approach to doing that. Because of course the problem is that in cryptocurrencies, traditionally what you can modify is the supply, right? So you can modify the value by varying the supply. And so far the technologies dealing with that supply have been focused on not trying to modify the price with the supply. They've just been trying to come up with a fair way of modifying that supply so that it's steady and equitable, and the difficulty is adjusted properly, and all that good stuff. But you can't affect the demand for the currency through a cryptocurrency. That is determined by the market, right? Now, there have been some efforts so I'm sure there are some centralized technologies out there that can try to peg things one way or the other, and I really am not interested in those. If they're centralized, then I don't really consider them to be cryptocurrency technologies in any significant way. If there's just some guy that's like, oh, well, I'll just modify the amount of coins so that matches the dollar or whatever, that's not really interesting to me. There have been some people with cryptocurrency projects where they would try to peg to the dollar based on pre-mining or buying up at the initial start of the currency, a whole bunch of the currency, and then buying and selling and trying to manipulate the market into achieving a kind of pegging. To me, this is just central planning manipulation of the market. I think it's a pretty terrible idea as far as I can tell, but if people want to try it out, that's fine by me. I'm more of a free market guy, and whether it's the government centrally planning the economy or some dude in his house trying to centrally plan a currency, I don't think either of those is going to be very effective in the long run. But of course, if I'm wrong about that, we shall see. Now, keep in mind that if you're looking to decrease the volatility of a cryptocurrency, it makes sense to me that right now people would be looking to try and somehow peg it to a fiat currency. But if cryptocurrencies are successful, and I think they will be in the long run, the fiat currency is not the stable place that you want to peg the value to, because they're going to be the ones that become highly volatile. And in fact, if you take a long view of fiat currencies, if you look at like the US dollar, for example, where it's lost something like 98% of its value over the last century, that's not very good, frankly, in terms of people's savings. And if you compare that to how gold and silver have done in the markets over the years, it's really, really poor. There's a number of interesting comparisons that you can make to the gold and silver price. So, for example, I've seen an image meme where they point out that, in 1970, 1980, somewhere around there was a certain minimum wage, right? And if you continue to pay people that exact amount of silver, and you continue to pay them in silver over the years, then minimum wage would be almost exactly where it was several decades ago. Plenty, above the threshold that they use to determine whether people are in poverty or not. And really, minimum wage is just it's a very, very small percentage of the economy. It only affects a very small number of people that are actually paid minimum wage. And so if you were going off of this like silver standard, even the people that are just getting into the economy, that are being paid the bare minimum, would be making pretty decent bank. So the problem, of course, is not with the economy or with minimum wage or anything to do with that. It's to do with the money that we're using. And so fiat currencies are not so much where I'd be looking to stabilize, but it's certainly true that over the shorter term perspective, lots of fiat currencies, not all of them, but some fiat currencies are more stable in terms of their price. I just don't think that will continue to be the case indefinitely. I think that the dollar's days are ultimately numbered, and within my lifetime we will see the dollar collapse. So another question: can you attach software to the blockchain or attach a movie to it like Pirate Bay? And one of the other viewers was saying, yes, the link protocol does this by using magnet links, presumably for torrents. It's used on the Feathercoin blockchain, but it is blockchain agnostic. And I'm not sure exactly yet what the application of that would be, but yeah, of course you can. You could take a magnet link and you could throw that into the blockchain if you wanted to. You probably would not try to take an entire movie and put it into blockchain because that's far too large in size, but you could give kind of a pointer to other things. And I'm sure that people will be doing more and more of that in the future. So this viewer says, lately Ian Mears is coming out swinging at Darkcoin and their transaction anonymity. How anonymous is Darkcoin's DarkSend versus Zerocoin/Zerocash versus CryptoNote? And which, in your opinion, has the best approach at achieving anonymous transactions? So I've talked about this a few times on the show, but I do have some new information to present this week. We talked about this a little bit earlier with some of the tweets that we featured from Ian Mears and Zerocoin. But it certainly is true that the anonymity provided by Darkcoin right now is fairly limited. The pools, from what I understand, the anonymity pools, or the coin join pools, let's call them, for DarkSend are not very large in size, so you're not getting to hide with many other people in these DarkSend transactions. And depending on what you do with the money later down the line, depending on how good your coin control is, so to speak, keeping separate pools, separate streams of money separate from each other so they're not being recombined later on, you may undo some of the anonymity you gained from DarkSend in the first place. And of course, DarkSend is reliant on this kind of these master nodes who are able to map between starting addresses, input addresses, and output addresses for each DarkSend transaction. And I'm a little bit skeptical by this idea that if you require 1,000 Darkcoin for a master node, that this is going to improve the security or the trustworthiness of master nodes. Because to me, it just means that any adversary who wants to have a master node and wants to snoop on the network has to spend more money in order to achieve that master node. Right now, it's not a lot of money though. And who has lots of money to burn on shit like trying to snoop on a relatively small multi-million-dollar economy? Well, the NSA has lots of money to burn on that. Police forces have lots of money to burn on that. Various parts of the military. Organizations all over the world are just constantly burning money on random stuff. So even it costs them $1 million to run a master node, they're one of the few people that are uniquely suited to spend $1 million on this. And if they want to create kind of a chilling effect on free commerce, then it might not be a bad investment to do that, to really make Darkcoin look foolish by busting some person through this kind of transaction analysis. So I'm a little bit skeptical that this requirement for 1,000 Darkcoins is a better way of securing master nodes, but I'm open to argumentation on that. Now, Darkcoin said that they were going to improve on the limitations of their DarkSend by doing ring signatures, and apparently they're not doing ring signatures any longer. And so the question is, well, what are they going to do next? And I don't know that answer yet, but they do need to do something in order to continue advancing the state of DarkSend. I trust that they will continue to work on it. The question is, what technologies will they select, and how effectively will they be able to improve on that anonymity? On the CryptoNote side of things, they're using ring signatures, and assuming that Ian's observations are correct, then there are some significant limitations there. You might only get maybe 20 other people that you can mix with for any given CryptoNote transaction, whereas with Zerocash, you could be mixing with thousands or tens of thousands or millions of people, depending on how popular that Zerocash currency is with each transaction, because of that limitation on the size of transactions for ring signatures. And so on that comparison alone, it would seem Zerocash would win out. Now, of course, Zerocash is not out yet, right? And one thing that we see regularly in the cryptocurrency space is that people underestimate how long it's going to take to get their technology out. And they underestimate how many unforeseen technical issues will come up and whatnot. So who knows when a Zerocash based cryptocurrency will be available? It doesn't exist right now. So, in terms of what's available right now, it's not even available for comparison. Between CryptoNote and a Darkcoin right now, those are both available right now. That's a tough call. I would almost put more stock in the CryptoNote approach to things, But I also don't know what CryptoNote's game plan is for continuing to advance their technology. If it stays frozen in place where it is right now and DarkSend continues to be advanced, then maybe DarkSend version 3 or 4 overtakes CryptoNote. I don't know. So if you're looking to speculate on these different competitors, I would have maybe a hand in both of those pots, so to speak. I am very curious about what's going to happen with Zerocash now. Now, one other piece of information that I wanted to share that is quite important. Ian was saying on Twitter that one of the weaknesses of Zerocash is that they have to, in order to get a Zerocash cryptocurrency going, they have to do this kind of like setup initialization phase before it can be used. They generate these numbers or some data, essentially. In order for the currency to work properly, some trusted party or a number of parties has to do that initialization phase. Now, what I've been hearing from a lot of skeptics is that, well, if we can't actually trust those people to do this initialization, then that data will act as like a backdoor, a secret key to de-anonymize Zerocash transactions. But what Ian was saying was that, in fact, no, that's not the case. What it would allow you to do is to debase the currency and to mine coins or mint coins that you didn't actually mint, but it would not help you to de-anonymize the transactions. So from that perspective, he seems to be saying that there is no weak point for the anonymity of Zerocash. And that's pretty important, because even if the currency is being debased, if you're only briefly using a Zerocash cryptocurrency to dip in and out of it just to privatize your other cryptocurrency, then it doesn't matter as much that it can be debased. I mean, it's not good for the stability of the coin and whatnot, and the mining and all that stuff, but it has less of an impact on the anonymity. And so that's quite an interesting claim to me. That seems to eliminate one of the significant weak points of the Zerocash design. And of course, they are working on ways to come up with multi-party protocols for doing this initialization phase, setting up this data or this number that the rest of the system hinges on. And the idea there is like, well, if you put it out to the community, there's enough good people out there in the community, if they participate, that even if there's some bad actors that try to meddle with this or record some information about the data that's being generated, this kind of secret key that no one ought to know about, if that's distributed amongst many people and a large enough portion of those people are honest and good and they don't try to hold on to that information, then it's not really a problem. And I'm sympathetic with that argument in many ways, because that is kind of the premise of Bitcoin in general with mining, right? The idea is, the big attack on Bitcoin is the 51% attack, meaning that 51% of bad actors get together and get to do 51% of the mining in the network and overcome the remaining honest actors in the network. If you just have a lot of bad actors in the network, then the system doesn't work. Mining doesn't work. Bitcoin mining doesn't work. And so it makes some sense to me that we would rely on this premise that the majority of actors are good actors. So now there's not a perfect analogy between the group of people who would want to secure the Bitcoin network through mining and the group of people that would be willing to run this multi-party protocol for initializing Zerocash cryptocurrencies. But I think it's an interesting comparison nonetheless. So it may turn out that Zerocash really doesn't have any downsides compared to DarkSend and CryptoNote. And it seems that the anonymity that's provided by Zerocash is just superior. They are not only encrypting who the currency is coming from, and who it's going to, but they're also encrypting, the amount and the timestamps and all kinds of stuff. And that's just better. That's better in anonymity, more privacy than what these other cryptocurrencies are offering right now. So, and I think it would take a pretty damn substantial change to, let's say, Darkcoin to match Zerocash in that regard. In the long run, Zerocash is looking quite good right now, but keep in mind, they're saying 3 to 6 months, and usually when these predictions come out, it ends up taking much longer for things to kind of stabilize and actually be usable. So take that for what it's worth. So one last little question that I'll answer here. One of the viewers asked, what determines the value of the US dollar? And I'm sure that many of the viewers understand this topic, but I'll just give you sort of my little perspective here. So before World War I, the United States was pretty far down in terms of their economic power. I guess this would be measured primarily in terms of GDP, right? It's number like 14 or something like that. So somewhere way down there. It was the Anon coin of nation states in terms of economic activity. The formation of the Federal Reserve and the Bretton Woods system and all that stuff, these all helped the United States get into World War I. And then in World War II, the United States did two things. One was that they joined into the war towards the very end, and pretty much at that point, all of the participants were already pretty beaten up and had lost a lot of money and lost a lot of troops and human beings and buildings and economic productivity. And so the U.S. kind of stepped in and swept up the trash, so to speak. And of course, they dropped a few atomic bombs on the already soundly defeated Japan and claimed victory. And then they demanded a bunch of gold and other stuff from all the people that they had just stomped on. They also put a tremendous amount of economic activity into the military-industrial complex. They said to manufacture of automobiles and steel and all kinds of stuff, look, stop what you're doing. This is what you're going to do from now on. You're going to make tanks. You're going to make planes. Scientists, stop what you're doing. You're going to focus on the Manhattan Project. All this kind of stuff. And they printed a lot of money and war bonds and all that kind of stuff to fund this effort. And they really started gearing up on this military-industrial complex, and that has not ended since then. And so a lot of the United States' ability to dominate the world economically came from being the least beaten up at the end of the war, having a military that was in good shape and could bully around other militaries that were in very bad shape, bullying people into trade relations using that military might. So the strength of the military at the end of the World War II compared to other militaries was what allowed them to set the economic stage for the petrodollar. And after a series of bullying that took place, they were able to make their trade so prevalent with so many countries that it became a natural choice as the petrodollar standard. Petrol being, the one thing that everyone in the world needs desperately to keep their economies going. And so it became this kind of world reserve currency. So what determines the U.S. dollar's value? Well, initially it was it was military dominance, which led to a kind of economic dominance. And then it was kind of like a network effect that happened with the dollar, that when you become, 20% or whatever it is of the world's economic, if you are involved in 20% of the world's economic exchanges, then it makes sense that your currency would be used as the reserve currency. Of course, what we have seen over recent years is a decline in the involvement of the United States in other countries' trade, more recently, we have seen countries threatening to leave the dollar standard. We're seeing some trade between China and Russia to do with oil and no longer using the dollar as a medium of exchange for that, exchanging things like gold and yuan and stuff like that. And China is big enough that the U.S. can't simply bully them out of that. Other countries have been small enough that U.S. could, do that. So like Iraq, for example, one of the reasons for the invasion in Iraq, it's not the only reason, but it's one of them. It's one of the incentives that the powers that be had to make that occupation take place, was that Iraq had threatened to divorce itself from the dollar standard as well, and to start trading oil, not using dollars, but using other stuff. That was a threat made by Saddam Hussein, and one of the consequences of that threat was he was assassinated, he was murdered, and his country was laid to ruin. And I do think that's a pretty powerful message to send to other nation states, that like, look, if you're going to make this threat, it's a real nice country got there. It would be a real shame if something were to happen to it. You know what I mean? So a lot of the value of the US dollar has revolved around the initiation of force, superior military technology and resources. Of course, the US spends more on its military than the next many countries combined, has enough atomic weapons to blow the world up many times over, and all that kind of stuff. I think that a lot of nation-state warfare in the future will revolve more around cyber warfare instead of kinetic warfare. It may still be very devastating to the populace, because if your cyber warfare results in hospitals being shut down and critical infrastructure and so forth, that does lead to deaths and economic devastation and so forth. And so even though this is stuff that takes place on computers, it may not be less lethal really for the civilian populace. But we'll just have to wait see how that plays out. I don't know exactly how that's going to work out yet. The motivation for that is, if for example, if the United States and China ever wanted to go to war, with kinetic warfare, it quickly escalates to atomic warfare, right? And that doesn't work out for any of the leaders, because they can put themselves in underground bunkers with enough food and for their families and their loved ones. They're like cockroaches. They could survive any of that shit. But it's not very fun to live underground in a bunker for the rest of your life and never see a new movie again, never hear a new song again, never eat a new cuisine that's been invented again. That's all stuff that comes out of the freer market, and that's what the powers that be rely on in terms of improving their standard of living. It's not fun to be in an underground bunker and never have a new surgical procedure invented, So this is why they don't want to go to nuclear warfare, and cyber warfare is perhaps a way for them to kind of attack each other without it escalating to this kind of doomsday scenario immediately. Of course, it's possible for military commanders to say like, oh, well, your cyber warfare is devastating, and so we're going to drop a nuke on you. That's possible, but they may have some terms of engagement that would prevent that. I don't know. So those are a few of my thoughts on the value of the US dollar. And with that, I think that will end Dark News for today, June 3rd. This is episode 013. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions during the week that you would like to have answered for the next show, you can, of course, tweet at Dark News Show on Twitter, or use hashtag Dark News. And in the meantime, I wish you all the best in the markets, and have a dark week.